This video is sponsored by Maclay. And from the 22nd to the 29th of November, Maclay will be holding a Black Friday sale where all items will be 50% off, with 10% of all sales being donated to solar aid. So head on over to maclay.co.uk. This is the US auto industry, a multi-billion-dollar industry that for the vast majority of the last century had been the largest and most lucrative auto market across the world. Home to many of the pioneers that made valuable contributions to the automobiles many people drive today, the United States of America's auto industry has had a significant impact on US culture, from featuring in songs to influencing how and where US citizens live their lives today. But how much of an impact does the US auto industry have today? How did it become this huge influencing force that has lobbied many a politician? And what might the future bring for this large and money-rich industry? Well, to find the answers to those questions, we must first start with its history. Welcome to the US auto industry. Also, if you're new here, hit that like button and subscribe, and check out my channel support box below. I'd really appreciate it. Okay, on with the video. So, let's rewind our clocks to the 1890s, the time when the very first modern Olympics took place in Athens, and the US auto industry began to emerge. Now, in its early stages, the US auto industry was made up of hundreds of different companies. There were 253 active automobile manufacturers already by 1908. But, as you can imagine, cars weren't cheap at this time, and only the wealthy could afford to purchase them. However, this didn't stop the US auto industry in the early 20th century, which had by then cemented itself as the leading global auto industry, mainly due to its access to cheap raw materials, the overall US's rate of industrialization, and the size of the US market. These factors allowed for the mass production of cars to pick up speed in the US, and this was furthered by a drop in the price of cars and the introduction of payment plans during the early 20th century. So much so that you could purchase a car for about $875 back in 1916, which is about $22,000 in 2021. Compared to other global competitors at the time, the US was a clear automobile powerhouse. In 1913, the US produced 485,000 of the 606,000 motor vehicles worldwide. That's 80%. But changes were taking place domestically. For starters, the 253 active automobile manufacturers in 1908 had shrunk to only 44 in 1929, with the big three, Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, now making up 80% of the US's auto industry's output. This was a big deal at the time, since the federal government was getting involved to help provide the necessary infrastructure that would make the auto industry even more lucrative, particularly with the Federal Aid Road Act in 1916 and the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1921, contributing to the US being home to more than 50,000 kilometers of paved road by 1924. Which, for context, is more than Taiwan's paved road network today. Now, after the Great Recession and the Second World War, not all US auto manufacturers managed to survive such a hostile business environment. And with the big three enjoying a significant advantage financially over their smaller competitors, well, capitalism is gonna do capitalism. And many of the smaller manufacturers stopped producing or were bought out. In the 1960s, however, competition from abroad began to arrive in a more meaningful way. Between 1966 and 1969, imports of foreign cars grew 84% on average annually, albeit from a low base, with the Volkswagen Beetle being the biggest seller. US manufacturers began to really feel the competition in the following decades, with the oil and energy crises in the 1970s, and domestic regulations linked to fuel efficiency. This saw a period of downsizing take place, which European and Japanese auto manufacturers were able to capitalize on. In fact, in 1981, US concerns about Japanese car imports led to a quota being set, meaning that Japan could export only a maximum of 1.68 million cars to the US, which actually resulted in Japanese companies moving into the US luxury car market in search of higher profit margins. So the quota didn't work out as planned. In the following decades, many US auto manufacturers have seen much more modest growth, and in many areas, growth has just flatlined. Certain areas of production have moved abroad, especially to Mexico, as NAFTA was signed in 1994, which more or less brings us to the position in which the industry finds itself in today. So, what is the US auto industry like today? Has it managed to reinvent itself, or is foreign competition proving too difficult to beat? So, let's start with the big figure headline. The US auto industry today contributes about 3% to the USA's GDP. That's north of $620 billion US. That's about the same size as Sweden's GDP. But it's more than just that, because the US auto industry isn't just large in size, but it is an important driver of innovation and has long been the backbone of US manufacturing, providing many a citizen with the skills and knowledge to make a positive contribution to the economy. Just check these figures out. In Q1 of 2021, the US auto industry employed around 4.1 million people in the US. And if you stretch the definition to include suppliers of auto parts, dealerships, and local businesses, then the industry as a whole supports more than 7 million US jobs. And the big three US automakers still have a commanding position in their domestic market, and also account for a majority of US auto employees. But it's worth mentioning that foreign auto companies do have a noticeable presence in the US and add to the level of competition for the world's second largest auto market. This competition for market share has led to the industry being a significant contributor to research and development in the US. So much so that US automakers and suppliers pump in around $23 billion annually into R&D. That means that on your averagely priced car sold in the US, around $1,300 goes towards research and development. And it's not just those in the USA purchasing US cars. In fact, automakers and their suppliers in the US have been the largest exporters of manufactured goods in recent years in the country of 50 states. But despite all this, changes are taking place that may jeopardize the position of the US's auto industry internationally, and possibly even at home. Now, there are two tests that the US auto industry is currently going through that will tell us whether it will remain an international giant or whether it will be in a relative state of stagnation. And the first of these tests starts with the answer to the following question. Which countries have the most amount of cars per capita? Take a guess. Even type it down in the comment section below. Now, my guess is that you probably said a list of developed car-centric countries, like the US, Australia, and Canada, places where in many instances you can't just go for a 5-minute walk to buy some bread and milk. Instead, you have to get in a 2-ton vehicle and drive it 50 minutes to your nearest grocery store. And you'd be correct. All three of those nations make the global top 10. And this is an indication of just how saturated the domestic market is. Although disposable incomes are high in these countries, there is a whole list of many populous countries that are likely to see their demand for automobiles grow at a blistering pace. Countries like China, Turkey, Egypt, Indonesia, Nigeria, Bangladesh, and India will have markets that provide significantly more growth in the coming decades, and even if profit margins on the models sold there are less significant than those in the US market. It remains vital that US automakers don't get left behind when hundreds of millions of new consumers look to buying a car. In fact, many analysts have voiced their concerns with the ability of US auto brands to access significant shares in these markets over Japanese, Korean, European, and in some cases local competitors that have more experience either in the specific market or in selling smaller and cheaper cars in countries where consumers are expected to be more price sensitive than in the USA, Australia, and Canada. But that's not all. The other test for the US auto industry is of course the rise of EVs, electric vehicles. And although there has undoubtedly been a shift towards the production of EVs in the US in the last 10 years, it will be key to see whether US manufacturers manage to keep up with competitors abroad if incentives produced by domestic regulation lack in comparison to those implemented in China, the EU, Japan, and South Korea, as all are fighting for a piece of a market that is expected to be at least $800 billion in size by 2027. And getting ahead of the crowd could be what gives a brand the edge in getting consumers to purchase their product. So there you go. The US auto industry is an impressively large manufacturing network. It is a key innovator, exporter, and has shaped the way people in the US live their lives today. Despite the concerns that are often flagged by numerous reports about the direction of the US auto manufacturers, I personally think that they are, for the most part, overblown. US manufacturers and their brands are strong. They have high-tech facilities and can attract top human capital, even if they are unable to adapt as well as their competitors to the changes that the global auto market is currently facing. I still believe they will remain a key part of the US manufacturing sector. Hi everyone, thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like this video. Also, in the description box below, I have a channel support box. Please check it out as it helps me make more of these videos, and some even have a reward for you. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.